This video has been sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command, the award-winning MMO that you can play for free right now on mobile and PC by using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. Their latest expansion adds all new content from strange new worlds to the game. Explore these new story arcs with 3 brand new officers from the era: the ingenious Scotty, logical T'Pring, and relentless D'Chock. This comes alongside other new additions like the SOJOURN Forge building, a new territory to capture, and new customizations. If you've never played before, now is a great time to start because you can get rewards every day just by logging in. Build up a 7-day streak to get the epic Romulan Captain Nero, whose vicious leadership boosts weapon damage by 40%. And there's a fancy animated short featuring LeVar Burton as Geordie the Forge on their YouTube channel to introduce you to the story of the game. And that's not all! You can also use the promo code KARNRULES before July 31st to unlock Officer Kirk for free. Get Star Trek Fleet Command available for free on mobile and PC through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on screen. Hey everyone, welcome back to Spacedock. Please enjoy this compilation of our videos focused on sci-fi firearms and infantry combat-y sort of stuff. Hello everybody, I'm Hujuan and this is Spacedock. I recently played Cyberpunk 2077 and noticed that one of the smart weapons in the game functions a little oddly. The Kangtail Smart SMGs, while they work just like every other smart weapon in game, have this funky rotating barrel that I just don't see the point of. Which got me thinking about sci-fi firearms in general, as many of them, while cool looking, have a bunch of just bizarre features, such as asking the audience to like and subscribe in every video. For example, last week's breakdown was of the Auriga and Betty from Alien Resurrection. There's a number of standard made-up sci-fi guns in that movie, as well as a handful of more out-there ideas, like Ron Perlman's vacuum flask gun, and the wrist gun exoskeleton thingamabob that fires rounds that can ricochet a magic number of times. The main one that caught my eye though was the Lacrima 99 shock rifle that USM personnel carry around because of its shape. It's just wrong. How on earth do the rounds get from the magazine to the barrel? Where are the sights? Why does it look so uncomfortable? What will be my next question? It's a shame the weapons in Resurrection were so naff because of how amazing they all were in Aliens. I mean, who doesn't have a soft spot for the pulse rifle? Listen to it. It's one of the best firearms in sci-fi, from its instantly recognizable looks and sound to its use in the film. The big scene with Hicks showing Ripley how to use it isn't just an overview of the weapon, it's a key character moment as well. The gun is there, but it's really just a vehicle used to grow their relationship. There is one weird thing about the pulse rifle though: where exactly does that little magazine fit 95 rounds of 10mm caseless ammo? Master Chef's AR has the same problem. Now, the AR is great, I prefer the BR myself though, but in Halo CE it stuffs 60 rounds of 7.62 into each mag. Maybe Chief had one of those micro TARDISes from BSG Vipers in the gun. Time travelling ammo would explain why the UNSC is still using a 1950s cartridge hundreds of years into the future. Later iterations of the AR did tame this somewhat down to a mere 36 or 32 rounds. Inflation must have hit hard after the first game. In general, Halo is pretty good with its weapons, at least the standard UNSC ones. The exception being the railgun in 4 and 5 because it does the silly gap between the rails thing I mentioned in the kinetic weapons video last month. There are some other strange things going on with the weapons of the Covenant, Banished and Forerunners, but these don't do anything too egregious beyond their weird ergonomics when humans use them, and they're all alien tech anyway. The same can also kind of be said for the weapons of Mass Effect, but those are generally less on the side of esoteric laser and plasma stuff. They are often made by non-human companies using technology that they thought was left behind by the Protheans, but they are largely still just the same throw rocks at each other sort of kinetic weapons design, just juiced up a tiny bit. The thing is, almost every gun has 2 barrels, in the first couple of games at least, and they all fold inside themselves in ways that hurt the brain to think about. This is only possible because, well, it's a video game and you can make models clip into each other, but if they were real, they'd all have to be rickety empty cases. I adore Mass Effect, but this aspect of its weapon design does make me wince a little when I see them. The same applies to the standard issue handgun used by protectors in Continuum, which just pops out of its own grip. I love this show, but man, that just annoys me. The future assault rifles don't seem to do that at least, and instead opting for the classic modified airsoft gun route that The Expanse and many other things also took. A much better transforming gun is the absolutely wonderful Zorg ZF-1 from the Fifth Element, because it genuinely looks like it could fold up inside of itself, almost. Despite how awesome it is though, one single weapon having every one of those functions is a bit mad, and the ergonomics and balance of the thing would likely be a bit strange. It's also absolutely bonkers that it has a self-destruct button that seems like you could accidentally push it. Who builds that into their weapons? Oh, this guy, right. While on the subject of the Fifth Element, can we talk about this? What is going on here? Why does it have spikes on it? And Corbin's handgun makes me scratch my head a bit too. I still adore the film though, and these odd weapons do fit right into the bright and exaggerating setting perfectly. Unfortunately, I can't say the same of Jane's Callahan full-bore autolock. This may be sacrilege, but it's kinda goofy looking, like a toy gun someone made out of a bunch of multicolored Lego blocks. And the extra ammo held in the folding stock look like they're on the verge of leaping out to freedom. It doesn't fit any of the rest of the Wild West aesthetic basically every other firearm has going on, which may have been the point of it, but yeesh, they missed the mark there. The other standout weapons in Firefly, the Lassiter and the laser pistol, do look somewhat coherent at least, even if they have their own peculiarities like the Lassiter's grip. And at least they have grips, unlike the stick or staff type weapons that pop up now and then, most obviously in Stargate. Like come on, you're going to struggle to aim these things, which is fine if you're a Jafar and you exist to sow terror into a populace, but if you're not, you're gonna struggle. The Bedrosian weapon from late in Season 3 of SG-1 just looks impossible to accurately shoot, and the same goes for the Wraith spear gun that these props got reused into. The Zat Nicotel is kinda the same as they look very top heavy, but I suppose the same terror weapon justification applies to those too, maybe? So, just why exactly do these strange weapons appear in sci-fi? I think the first answer here is the rule of cool. The transforming guns from Mass Effect and Continuum are weird, but can be seen as cool and futuristic. The sonic knockback gun from Minority Report? Well, you spin it to reload, just like the way Arnie cycles his shotgun in Terminator 2, which is just an amazingly cool way to break your fingers if you're not Austrian American or a cyborg. Which brings me to another very common thing that happens, which is taking a real or airsoft weapon and enclosing it within a prop shell to make it look like something else. This adds some extra constraints to the design of the fake weapon, and you can end up with things like the enormously oversized pistols from Chronicles of Riddick. Even if the designers work around that problem though, sometimes things like the limousine-length magazine for the Endo battle rifle that scrapes against the user's arm happens. But at least those are fired by Austrian-American cyborgs, so they can get away with it. The real-life OICW and related weapons have a similar deal with two weapons combined into one, and even look much the same. Also, hidden away inside the Endo's prop shell is one of the oddly shaped rifles from Calico. Ah, Calico, the herald of vaguely futuristic 90s space guns, with their various rifles and pistols with top-mounted helical magazines used all over the place from Star Trek to Total Recall. So it's not only fake space guns that can look weird, but real ones too. Sadly, those dropped out of favour for G36s and Chris Vectors for that vaguely futuristic look, as well as the also top-loaded gold-busting P90. The same goes for the Mateba series of revolvers, which have been a staple of the cool handgun niche ever since Togusa ripped that bad boy out in Ghost in the Shell, as they have been somewhat replaced by the Chiappa Rhino. So that's a few reasons why sci-fi weapons can look strange, but there's another reason that applies more to weapons that are made up from scratch, which is simply that the artists responsible either don't know much about guns, or it just wasn't a priority. Behind the scenes issues like deadlines, budgets, or even just wanting something overtly alien also have to be taken into consideration. Not every production team has the capability or even the desire to create turbo-authentic firearms. But when it does happen, ooh, it's fantastic. I've already provided some examples, but for me, Elysium is the go-to for cool sci-fi weapons, due to the combination of the director, Neil Blomkamp, and the legendary concept artist, Aaron Beck. It's got the modified AK which fires airburst rounds, it's got the chemrail, it's got the laser cutter, it's got the smart rifle from Aliens, sort of, okay not really, and it's got explosive shurikens. All these fun video game weapons that were thought through and well designed. Brilliant stuff. I'm going to round this all out by pointing out the exact same thing occurs with spacecraft design. There's a lot of odd ship designs out there in sci-fi, and while they could have more effort put into them or made deliberately more realistic, that is often either not possible or just not the goal of those who created it. Not every vessel and not every gun has to be a wholly authentic and possible creation. In the end, I think the worst offenders are those that are right there on the edge, in that uncanny valley where they seem realistic, but then have one feature that makes them goofy, just like that spinning barrel on one of Cyberpunk's submachine guns. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana, and over the Christmas break I played a bit of FTL, which I'm not all that good at, but it did get me thinking about boarding actions. They happen a lot in sci-fi, and if you want to hear about my top 5 boarding actions, let me know down below in the comments. But why do they happen, and how? As with a lot of sci-fi space warfare concepts, boarding has its roots in naval warfare, where it was a key method of ship-to-ship combat before truly long-ranged weapons were developed. Ships don't just have health bars and disappear when they take enough damage, so even if they lose a gun battle, they may not surrender and instead force a boarding action. Or perhaps a crew wish to capture some cargo, or take prisoners, or even claim the ship itself as a prize. A lot here can be transferred across to spacecraft, but there's a whole bunch of complications, some of which depend on the realism level of the setting. Distances can be absolutely vast, and movement more of a challenge than simply heaving to. You may have to match velocities, and spaceship shapes are often very strange and not at all conducive to docking with hostile intent. Vacuum also isn't terribly hospitable towards life, so all ships are enclosed, which further increases the difficulty. But despite all those problems, it still happens an awful lot, and for a huge range of reasons, both in-universe and out. Maybe boarders want to get something specific on the ship, like an item or data from its computers. Maybe they want to plant a bomb because they otherwise are unable to destroy the vessel. Maybe they want to capture the ship or its crew. The most basic way of boarding is just pulling up alongside your target and heading over in an EVA suit, or if you're really lucky, docking directly. This generally doesn't happen that much as it exposes your ship and crew to the most danger. There's just so many things that can go wrong with getting close to an enemy spacecraft unless you can sneak right up on your target. Even ignoring the potential havoc that weapons can cause, engines themselves can be highly damaging, both through their plumes and due to collisions. If the target is somehow disabled, there's still enormous risk when two ships are that close to each other. They may regain control and try to break away, causing damage to your ship, or even people outside on EVA. However, if you well and truly have overpowered them, then doing a hard dock is absolutely the best option you have when boarding, as it allows the easiest access to the enemy's interior. Plus, you capture everything and everyone on board the ship, as well as the vessel itself. Okay, so some flaws with boarding in this manner, but also it may be a requirement of the battle because you just have no other choice, or no equipment to do it another way. If you don't want to put your main ship at risk, then you can make good use of smaller transfer ships to carry people over. These can be all sorts of things: shuttles, sleds, drop pods, fighters. They can be custom made for boarding and only good at boarding, or pressed into service in a role they were never intended to fill. If you're really desperate, just an EVA suit with thrusters can be used. Using craft like these does mean you put less risk on your main vessel, as it doesn't need to get anywhere near the target. But instead, this just transfers the threat of being shot down to the shuttles or pods or whatever you're using. However, you can send many of them, and each one can just be a fraction of the entire boarding force. Some may be lost, but some will get through. You can even the odds here by mixing in decoys and missiles and other stuff as well. Anything shot down that isn't full of people is absolutely a win here. The next step of the process, which I glossed over a bit before, is the actual act of gaining entrance and boarding the target, which can be achieved in a number of different ways. Firstly, there's just rolling up to an available docking port and opening it, though unless they weren't at all expecting guests, then it'll likely be locked. So some hacking assistance will be required here, either the digital kind or the physical kind. If you don't want to go through the obvious choke point here though, you can also soft dock just to a part of the hull and cut your way in, either slowly and carefully or quickly and explosively. This does require specialist equipment though, and carries risks of its own, such as from causing rapid decompression, or worse if you happen to hit a fuel line or something. Alternatively, you can very hard dock with the hull. The main drawback here is the considerable strain placed upon the pod's occupants, so you better have some inertia dampening tech to prevent them from getting smushed. Of course, it may just be simpler to aim for the target's hangar bay, if they have one and it's left open and unprotected. All you need to do then is deal with defenders and opening doors, which you'd have to do anywhere you dock. All those options are very hard work though, and perhaps you're feeling terribly lazy today and your setting has the wonderful technology of teleportation. This is easily the most direct and potentially deadly option, as boarders can skip all the faffing about outside and go right to their objectives, be it critical personnel or key systems. Drop some Borg right into engineering or the bridge and bam, you have total control of the ship. It's also possible to make use of other teleportation methods that used fixed infrastructure, like this handy Stargate that Apophis was using that forced SG-1 to accidentally board one of his motherships. The usual counter to these shenanigans is typically some technobabble thing that prevents teleporting entirely, because let's face it, it is extremely powerful. This commonly manifests as shields or some magic interference that blocks teleporting or gaining a location lock. And these countermeasures can go both ways too. A team could board and then trapped and unable to leave again if this tech gets activated, stranding them without support and unable to retreat. That's just one of the many hazards from entering enemy territory, as, generally speaking, defenders tend to have some significant advantages over attackers. They know the ground, they might have prepared static defenses, they're likely to know where boarders are coming from and can ambush them at choke points. They also are very likely to have control over certain ship systems. This is why you wear a spacesuit. Yes, they can limit your mobility and vision, but so does running out of air. And if things get really bad and boarders are getting close to something sensitive, then the defenders may have the option of scuttling the ship as a denying action. On the flip side, boarders can have some advantages of their own. Depending on how they gained entry, they may very well have a huge element of surprise, and depending on their goals, may not be concerned with preserving the integrity of the ship. They could potentially use all sorts of dangerous weaponry with zero regard for collateral damage, which a defending side would need to be far more careful with. Either way, the demands of the story are going to have the biggest impact on which side is going to win, but it has to be believable. As for weapons, in general inside a ship you're going to have some limitations placed on the choices you have here. They are not a universal feature of sci-fi spacecraft, but small confined corridors aren't going to be a happy place to clear with longer rifles. You're going to want smaller weapons that are far easier to handle indoors, shorter barreled things like submachine guns. You could probably get away with carbines and bullpup rifles and such, but with the increased energy in the rounds of those weapons, there's chances of doing harm to something you did not intend. What about more funky close quarters weapons? Video game logic dictates shotguns would be pretty good in these situations, but equally they may be too specialist. Flamethrowers are atrocious weapons with horrific effects, but inside a small space where they suck up oxygen they'd be very potent, but less useful in zero-G or total vacuum. You don't just need guns though, as ranges are likely going to be so short that hand-to-hand is a damn near certainty, so you don't want to be caught without your handy shotgun axe. Overall, boarding is incredibly important in ship-to-ship combat, but paradoxically, despite how commonly it occurs, it still probably doesn't happen often enough, especially after a shooting battle. After all, ships don't just disappear when they hit zero health. Also, despite the challenges associated with them in space, boarding actions are just such good vehicles for story and character moments that it's easy enough to bend the plot to make them happen. Desperate struggles, tense moments, all wrapped up in something that is a bit different to the usual spaceship fare, so they are well worth coming up with situations to make them happen. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana, and today I'm following up on the video on boarding actions from January, where a whole bunch of you were definitely interested in hearing my top 5. So here we are. First up in the number 5 spot is an extremely risky little maneuver the crew of the Rocinante pulled to capture the Azure Dragon in the last season of The Expanse. There are a ton of boarding actions across the show, but sometimes they were just background events like with the Donninger, but this particular one is special because of the circumstances that surrounded it. The Roci crew were forced to sneak up on the Dragon and attempt to capture it to stop them from wiping extremely valuable data from their drives. But of course things didn't quite go to plan and they were noticed, forcing an extremely dangerous chase where the Roci couldn't disable the Dragon with its armament, but the Dragon could absolutely torch the Roci. This is fantastic and really shows how incredibly dangerous spacecraft are, even when unarmed. Then there's that terrifying leap that Bobby makes over to the Dragon before stopping it with an EMP. What if the Dragon had turned at that very moment? She could have been crushed like a bug on a windscreen, or vaporized by the drive. Even after that, she nearly got obliterated by whatever that heavy weapon was, showing another massive risk the entire Roci gang took with this boarding operation. Anything could have gone wrong, and it's lucky that no one was really injured, and they managed to get the data they needed. The number 4 spot goes to the War Rocket Ajax battle in Flash Gordon, which I had forgotten about until seeing it in the comments. You there, yes you have fantastic taste. This whole thing is an amazing battle where Flash and the Hawkmen need to capture the rocket in order to attack Mingo City to stop Earth from being destroyed by merciless Ming. As they would be totally outmatched in an open fight, they instead lead it into a trap, with Flash acting as bait to draw it away from the guns of the city and up through a dense cloud layer. That is when the Hawkmen attack, diving on the ship at short range. The apparent arrogance of the rocket's commanding officer causes him to just stop there and try to fend off the boarders, since he just doesn't recognise the danger his vessel is truly in. The fight itself mainly occurs on the exterior of the ship, with Ming's troops firing from portholes, and the main objective of the Hawkmen being to force entry with a small, remotely detonated mine. Once that is done, they swarm inside the stricken ship, taking out any remaining defences and capturing it to use against the city's lightning field. This whole thing is just a fantastic boarding sequence because of 3 reasons. It shows the huge advantage that surprise can bring to an otherwise unwinnable fight, it has that incredible soundtrack from Queen, and Brian Blessed looks like he's having the absolute time of his life. What is not to love here? My third favourite boarding action is from Mass Effect 3 Citadel, where you have to take back the Normandy from a group of Cat 6 mercenaries. What makes it interesting is that you are boarding your own ship that you've spent 2 games living in, and there's a nice little twist on what boarding actions usually involve. First, you have to battle your way through the docking bay, which is insanely detailed compared to similar spaces in Mass Effect 1. I talked more about this in the ship scales video, so go check that one out if you didn't already. And subscribe now for a future video on ship sizes and why giant spacecraft are a bit silly. But back to the Citadel, where once you get to the ship, the inner airlock door is locked. The only way in is a hatch in the floor that is hilariously opened with Traynor's toothbrush, mentioned way back at the start of the game. Shep and co sneak aboard and get into combat in what was previously an entirely non-combat safe zone. Not even in 2, when the collectors got aboard, was the Normandy interior a full gameplay area. This makes the whole event an absolute novelty and perfectly fits the vibe of this set of missions. Then you go down to the cargo bay, which is, for once, full of cargo, and take on one of the more challenging combat encounters of the entire franchise. Overall, this mission does things that nothing else in the franchise did before, and sticks the landing perfectly between novelty, action, challenge, humour and drama. This is a massively complicated mix of tones, and it could have gone so wrong in so many ways, but they nailed it. The only disconnect is the way they handled Edie, who really should have prevented the Cat 6 guys from gaining a hold of the ship at all. Yeah, sure, she got disabled in a way that was a bit contrived, given that she is right there in the group with her remote-controlled mech body, but it's a required contrivance for the awesome set pieces that followed. In second place is the second playable level of the second Halo game, the defense of Cairo Station. Now, there are a lot of boarding actions through the Halo franchise, and it even started with one, but that first mission in Halo CE was a cramped maze of boring sci-fi corridors blasting away at enemies at point-blank range, and isn't very good. In great contrast, the opening of Halo 2 takes a similar concept and just amps it right up to 11. The station itself is a little more open, and it has great big windows everywhere, letting you see the battle going on outside, but more importantly, the incoming boarding ships. You even get to see exactly how the Tick-class craft attach themselves and bore through into the station before disgorging their cargo. As you fight through those Covenant troops, you come across improvised defences and can listen to the audio announcements declaring new places that have been attacked. And there's updates on the battle at large going on outside, which you also get to see key moments of, such as the other Mac stations getting blown up by their own boarders. And this plan by the Covenant is a really good way of attacking Earth. They take out the defensive weapon emplacements with a surprise attack by boarders on smaller craft before bringing in the capital ships. But things go a little differently on Cairo, as it has both Master Chief and Cortana aboard, who fires up the Mac and begins to engage cruisers as you progress through the station. And thanks to those windows, and even going outside, you get to watch the immense weapon going through its firing cycle. And of course, it ends with that cutscene where Chief takes out 2.7 billion tons of assault carrier. Just a fantastic level to play through and a brilliant boarding action, especially because you were on the receiving end of it. Before I talk about my favourite boarding action, the first honourable mention is Astartes. You all in the comments adore it, and it is an exceptional piece of filmmaking, but there's not all that much going on that makes it special in regards to boarding. The only boarding-y bit was the flight between the 2 ships. Everything else could have happened on a planet, or in a hive city, or in a giant underground moonbase, whatever. The boarding action was was only a tiny part of the whole, and there was nothing else going on with it, unlike the second honourable mention, Severed Dreams from Babylon 5. This is yet another one that was very popular in the comments, but it's really only a very tiny little side note in the tumultuous events of that exceedingly great episode. The boarding action itself turns into a horrible, brutal slaughter thanks to the Narn rushing in beyond where Garibaldi wanted to set up a choke point, and descends further into an outright hand-to-hand battle. And for what? The backup the boarders were desperately counting on was forced to turn back, leaving them high and dry. So while it is only a minor part of the battle, it hammers home just how utterly ridiculous the whole bloody affair was, and how badly things can go wrong for the attacking side. Taking the top spot is of course Battlestar Galactica. But which one? The prison ship? The Guardian base star? The final battle? While those are all good, the best is at the start of Season 2, after a brief battle where Galactica needed to compute some FTL coordinates. This took time, which allowed the Cylons to infect the ship with a virus and to get a heavy raider to make a landing. As this craft was entirely new to the Colonials, they did not recognise the danger it truly posed, and it wasn't until after the virus started causing havoc by shutting down main power that the true horror of what was happening set in. They had been boarded by Centurions, which are terrifying in a small space. They are huge, fast, deadly, and extremely hard to kill. In fact, they were near totally bulletproof, with only specialised explosive ammo able to take them out. All this was happening in darkness, with sounds of distant gunfire and pained screaming echoing through the ship. And then there's the goal of the Centurions, to reach Galactica's secondary control systems in order to vent the atmosphere, allowing them to turn its deadly weapons upon the civilian fleet surrounding it. To make stopping them more difficult for Galactica's crew, the Centurions also cut holes in the hull in key locations, exposing those areas to vacuum and cutting off access routes. All this makes the events of the episode absolutely gripping, and my favourite boarding action. It's tense, scary, and it's built around taking place inside a spacecraft, fighting incredibly capable adversaries using every advantage they have. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today I'm going to go over my top 10 firearms, or weapons, or guns, or however you want to refer to them, starting with the 0-point energy field manipulator from Half-Life 2. The gravity gun was not specifically built as a weapon, instead it was designed as a tool to lift and move heavy equipment. Despite that, it's one of the best weapons in the entire series, added as another facet of demonstrating the physics that Source Engine was capable of, along with the odd pace-destroying seesaw puzzle. Unlike those, it wasn't just a gimmick though. After you get a hold of it, it's generally well integrated, especially in the playground of Yeats that is Ravenholm. You can pick up grenades to throw back, do puzzles with it to get loot, throw toilets at giant bugs, all sorts of stuff. And it's the super weapon in the game's finale as you rampage throughout the Citadel to rescue the two Vances. It's always a pleasure to replay the game because of this weapon. The next one is from Mass Effect, where the weapons in general are a bit weird with the folding inside themselves, but generally are pretty cool. One of my favourites though, the M96 Matuk from 2, is a bit different. It's big and chonky, making it a pretty big departure from the standard sort of style of weapons largely inherited from the first game. That also carries over to how it plays, as it's a high-powered semi-auto rifle, filling the gap between sniper rifles and assault rifles. This is because it was added in a DLC pack along with the Phalanx and its laser sight, and the chargeable Geth plasma shotgun. So the devs were having a bit of fun with these weapons and had a bit more freedom with their design. And it shows in the Matuk, as it's an absolute beast of a weapon in the second game, rewarding good aim with very good damage, in a package more versatile than the snipers. And it sounds amazing too, really satisfying to use. In 8th place is the Lawgiver from Dread, the 2012 movie. The gun is just plain badass, with multiple types of rounds and fire modes, all voice controlled and with a neat little screen on the side to track all the ammo types. It's also got an integrated suppressor which somehow can be mechanically turned on and off, though really should probably just be on all the time because if it's there, why not? Another peculiarity is that it somehow fits 125 rounds in it, which is just nutty. But hey, it crossloads 4 types of ammo from multiple magazines, which is already mad, so why not? The DNA sensor it has also makes no sense because judges wear gloves, so how does it get their DNA? Despite these oddities, it's an amazing weapon from an amazing film. Next up is another Half-Life 2 weapon, the crossbow. This improvised weapon is a lot less versatile than the gravity gun, or really many of the other weapons, but I think it's the most satisfying weapon to use in the game. Everything about it just hits those spots, the thunk when you fire it, the massive impact that one-shots most enemies and can pin them to walls. Oh yeah, and the completely nonsensical choice to heat the rebar until it's glowing wouldn't do anything. It's completely mad and cool as hell, and the reload where you slap in new bars and they spark on contact. Brilliant. Sixth place goes to an absolute classic, because who doesn't love the pulse rifle? An iconic weapon from an iconic movie. I couldn't not include it on this list. And it's fantastic for many reasons, such as being a star in a scene, though as a way for two characters to develop their relationship a bit further. Still, doesn't stop it from being a breakdown of the gun. Other reasons it's cool, apart from the gorgeous sound of it, it's caseless, taking all the near future stuff of the G11 and putting that to use, with an ammo counter and even a tiny bit of the styling of it, despite being built around two real guns. And that's another reason it's amazing, they're physical live firing props, with the pulse rifle itself being a Thompson for the big muzzle flash, and the underbarrel grenade launcher being a cut down Remington 870. Not every prop had the functional parts, but it's still a neat detail and both are fairly well concealed. Number 5 is the Chemrail, the first of two things from Elysium, which has many interesting weapons, from the surface-to-space missile launcher to the Kusar Crow assault rifle to the laser cutter that Cassian Andor uses. But the Chemrail. This thing is neat, a two-stage weapon that fires 8.75 by 52mm fin-stabilized discarding rail accelerator saber rounds. The first stage uses chemical propellant to get the round moving before it hits the railgun's second stage, which pushes it up to its final velocity, where it has a muzzle energy of 18 kilojoules. This is comparable to the upper bounds of the 50 BMG round, so it's not completely insane for a man-portable firearm, though it would certainly have a hell of a kick if you're not wearing an exoskeleton. It's interesting because it's possibly one of, if not the only, hybrid chemical electromagnetic weapons in popular fiction, and it's mostly well thought out. It's got the magazine for the rounds, which are presumably caseless, and a removable power pack at the rear. Not sure if the muzzle flash will be like that, but it does look cool. Fourth place goes to the Arc Pistol, another Mass Effect weapon, though this time introduced in the third game. This high-tech Quarian sidearm has its roots in the arc projector from 2, but functions pretty differently as it's basically just a pistol. However, it has a party trick in that it can charge up to fire a high damage shot. It's not the best at spamming shots or high power shots, but being able to do both means you can take only this weapon for the fast ability charge times and still be able to deal with any kind of enemy. Also, it sounds amazing, looks fantastic with the animated charging bits, and the concept of it ionizing air with a laser for a bolt of electricity to follow sets it apart from the other standard pistols. In general, it's just another super satisfying weapon to use, especially in multiplayer where it can pair well with all sorts of skills. Third place goes to the FR-27 Sanction flechette rifle from the more recent Deus Ex games. This thing is super cool, even with just its appearance. It hits all those slightly over-complex near-future rifle things, with inspiration from many other firearms. There's a bit of FAMAS in there, there's shades of P90, there's also some influence from the fictional Saburo weapons from Ghost in the Shell. This makes it a gorgeous weapon with some wild mechanics behind it. Firstly, the reload is just bonkers, opening up the whole top of the gun, including the sights, and slotting in this sort of cartridge thing that can't possibly hold that many rounds. Then the flechettes themselves, which, when upgraded, can become target-seeking, automatically arcing towards the target's head. Now, this does make up for constantly messing up the zeroing of the gun when reloading it, but they arc really hard. These things would be pulling ridiculous Gs to turn that fast. It's crazy tech, but fun to use on such an awesome-looking rifle. In second place is another Elysium weapon, the modified AKM, though the weapon itself is fairly bog standard. It's the attachment and ammo that really makes it special. The attachment is a sight and laser rangefinder kit for the rifle to greatly improve its lethality when combined with the air burst ammunition. The user sights the target, sets the range, and then fires. I think what happens is that the sight programs the round as it passes through the end of the barrel, though it's odd there isn't a specific barrel attachment for this purpose. The round then explodes in a cone shape at the programmed distance, apparently with a kill zone comparable to a 40mm grenade, so these little things are really potent, though apparently the peculiarly shaped rounds do make it jam up a fair bit. It's just such a wonderful mixture of the century-old AKM and the tech slapped onto it in a fairly plausible way. Why make a whole new gun when you can make ammo and an add-on kit for one that works already? Before we reach first place, we have a ton of honourable mentions, so I'm just going to zoom through them, starting with the Zorg ZF-1 because it's mad like the film is. Next is the SPB-90 from Timesplitter's Future Perfect because it's a cool future P90, as is the Recluse from Destiny 2, sort of. Next is Dead Space's Plasma Cutter because come on, who doesn't enjoy chopping necromorphs apart with that? Another satisfying video game tool that becomes a weapon is Wolfenstein's laser craftwork, and I enjoyed the AR marksman from that game as well. Some more fun video game weapons are the Fatboy Overclock for the grenade launcher in Deep Rock Galactic because Half-Life 2's Overwatch rifle is also amazing, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. Switching to Mass Effect 3, we have the Harrier because it's a monster, and the Javelin because through walls. And Warframe has many fun weapons, including my favourite one, which you've likely never heard of. It's my Rattlegut kit gun. This is very specific because this is a modular weapon that can be set up in all sorts of ways, but mine is this. The parts are Rattleguts, Love Tap and Splat, and this is my build for it. In use, it's a full auto weapon with a sort of laser beam effect I love because you can see exactly where you're shooting, and it's super accurate and the magazine is enormous. I just love it. It hits the spot through pure usability and it's ridiculously reliable. Want to hit at range with it? Doable. Want to just spam it on hordes of enemies? Doable. Want to hit those big headshots? Doable. And when you do that, it triggers the Pax Seeker Arcane that sends out more bolts to hit other enemies. The only downside to it is that it's not amazing at the super high-end stuff, but I barely play that anyway. So yeah, my favourite weapon is fairly obscure, but it's one I made and use all the time in one of my favourite games. What about you? What's your favourite? Did I mention it? Let me know in the comments below. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujiwana and today I'm exploring sci-fi's obsession with melee weapons, going over some of the common tropes and examining why they get used so much. If you're a long-term viewer, we did a similar thing for guns already, so you know what to expect. We're going to start with the weapons that make the most sense, items that are tools that just happen to be used as melee weapons out of convenience in a particular situation. Knives, crowbars, axes, things of that nature. It's hard or impossible to say these don't make any sense because of their situational nature, though Starfield sure tries its best by giving many generic raider enemies fire axes as their primary weapon. Speaking of axes, their use in real life as breaching tools, particularly by firefighters, gives them an edge over many of these other tools in use on spacecraft, especially when combined with crowbars. Legend of Galactic Heroes makes particular use of axe-wielding, power armor-equipped boarding crews for exactly this reason, and because of the space fantasy armored knights vibe it wants to project. And the general vibe of a setting is one of the major reasons why melee weapons might show up. Take the sword duel in Firefly for example. Everything about that episode was centered around recreating a very specific historical feeling. Sure, the swords may not see widespread use outside of that circumstance, but they are there. They add to the world building of that part of society. There's also a lot of bleed over with fantasy here, but I'll talk about that later on. Getting back to weapons, there are those that are all weirdly shaped and probably impractical. Those ones used by an alien culture so it has to be different, or is a future version of an existing weapon that got spiced up for its own sake. One of the more obvious things here is the Klingon Bat'leth, which is the absolute poster boy for this with its odd shape. Gunblades are an offshoot of the weird impractical weapons, combining melee weapons with a ranged one, typically in such a fashion as to render both significantly worse. To be clear here, I don't mean bayonets, which essentially convert a long rifle into a spear without really changing how it functioned as a rifle. I mean things that smush a gun into a melee weapon in a strange way, like D'Argo's Qualter Blade, which is a powerful rifle, but to use it like that you have to hold it by the blade, which isn't the best. Speaking of blades, it is exceedingly common for sci-fi to justify melee weapons still being around by giving them some technological aspect that makes them far more effective than they otherwise would be. Stuff like monomolecular edges, incorporating nanotech or vibroblades. In a similar vein are chainswords, or weapons with things like thermal edges or powered up with electricity. Sometimes these just add a minor extra effect like stun weapons, or they go full on with the elemental effect going everywhere and conveniently never having any impact impact on the user. Frankly, if you're hitting people with a weapon like these, then the extra effect probably isn't going to do much, though in super gamified systems like Cyberpunk or Warframe or Destiny, then realism is hardly a concern. The next step up from these is to go to full-blown energy weapons. After all, it's hard to get more sci-fi than taking a standard weapon and turning it into a glowing, transparent thing, right? You got your plasma swords, you got your other kind of plasma swords, you got your other kind of plasma swords, and you got your other kind of plasma swords. And naturally, they all have dubious methods of containing the plasma they use, if they even bother with that at all. It's easy to see why these are used so much, as they are supremely cool, and can do extra special stuff like cutting through almost anything, but they have many issues that have been talked about to death over the years. Battery life, lacking weight, which is both a plus and a minus, and the eternally blurst just turn them off and on in a duel thing. Something I see brought up less often though is that energy blades that can cut through anything because they are hot are, well, really hot. Infrared radiation from a blade that can cut through metal like that would burn the user without touching them, so they're not cool weapons at all. Okay, that joke was terrible, but I will not apologise. And with lightsabers, we get to the core of where I think melee weapons really cemented themselves into the foundations of the genre. Science, fantasy, or even just sci-fi that took heavy inspiration from mythology or history before the widespread adoption of firearms. Star Wars, for example, a setting with wizards and witches and knights and ghosts. Melee weapons being here just makes sense. Speaking of Star Wars, how good was Diana Lee Inosanto's choreography in that last episode of Ahsoka? In fact, all the duels were pretty decent on a narrative level, with everyone having their own unique fighting style that fit their character. The camera wasn't cutting every picosecond to cover up imperfect choreography either. An active choice was made to clearly show the story of the fight instead. Yeah, the timing of the performers could have been better, but the style of it, the characterization and everything like that came through really strongly, which I feel is more important in Star Wars anyway. Another sci-fi staple that is heavy on melee combat is Dune, which has ample world building around why swords and knives are so heavily preferred. Shields slow down any high-speed object, so guns simply wouldn't work, and lasers cause other issues. Which is all very interesting, but really it's because melee combat is so much more personal, so much more intimate compared to a gunfight. Don't get me wrong, you can make a gunfight between two people have similar intensity and tension, but they're going to lack a lot of the back and forth that melee combat has. Some media has tried to get a similar vibe going on by combining the two, like Gunkata in Equilibrium, which ended up looking faintly ridiculous, and whatever this insanity is in Resident Evil Vendetta. Throughout all these examples, the sword stands out above all the others for how much it's been used. Star Wars obviously has a lot of them, but they're everywhere. Even the Klingons and the stereotypes around them and their little daggers and the bat'leth do actually have proper sword and machete style weapons in use. But why are they so popular? Simply put, swords are just practical weapons. That's why they've been used throughout all of history. They're just a big blade that can be carried easily. It's also relatively easy to sci-fi them up with some techie words, or magic, if you really feel the need, as we talked about earlier. But there's one specific type of sword that has reached such legendary levels of cool by itself that it stands out as being its own thing in regards to sci-fi. This is, of course, the katana. Well, really there's a bunch of varieties and many of the ones in sci-fi shouldn't count at all, but the word katana is so ingrained in people's minds that everything ends up coming under that umbrella. Even The Expanse can't get away from it, as the Rocinante started out as the tachi, which is the style of sword that the katana was derived from. They're so integral to the pop culture zeitgeist that I can't really say where they come from or why they show up so much. Obviously, they look cool, and there's the enduring image of the ninja, but beyond that, I have no idea. They're just there, even in settings that otherwise avoided dedicated melee weapons like Mass Effect, where the third game introduced them and had Kaileng and Phantoms using them. This kind of blends into another big reason for why melee weapons in sci-fi are so common that I alluded to earlier. There's just an expectation that a show or movie or game will have them because previous bits of media that are similar had melee weapons in a bit of a feedback loop. This even goes down to specific types of weapons being used, like katanas, or not used, like spears. Those saw widespread historical use but don't show up in sci-fi that often, which I think really is just down to them still feeling low-tech. Something like swords are already part of the genre, so people expect them in media they see or create, propagating their usage further. Spears never got that, so they don't appear as often, but it does feel somewhat special when they do show up, like the Beskar one in The Mandalorian. To wrap up, while melee weapons may not necessarily make a lot of sense, sometimes they do. They get included for lots of reasons, from wanting to create a specific vibe to the trappings of the genre, but are also exceedingly good at creating characterful moments between opposing forces.
What does katana mean?
Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today we're looking at power armor, or power suits, or whatever you want to call them, but not mechs, as difficult as it may be to draw a line between the concepts because it's so very dependent on what the creator of a setting wants. For example, Obadiah Stane's armor in the first Iron Man movie is so big it's more like a mech, but it's considered to be just an oversized suit. The same can sort of be said for the things from Avatar, the AMP and SMP, which are both referred to as suits, which is a bit weird because how is a crab a suit? So wherever this discussion goes, there's going to be some picking and choosing of what gets talked about for this reason. The first thing, and arguably the biggest deal for any power armor, is the power source, because without that, well, it's not powered armor, is it? There's a lot of energy that needs to go into moving around bits of armor and mechanical muscles matching the person wearing it, not to mention all the sensors and weapon systems and life support and all the other ancillary bits and bobs. The problem is power density. Whatever the power source is, it needs to be compact enough to be human portable, and achieving that for something that can run for any decent length of time is the single biggest hurdle that needs to be overcome for powered armor. Thankfully, this big deal is front and center for many depictions of them. That was the entire driving force behind Iron Man, where it's literally front and center of Stark's suits. Fallout has the power cores that you need to find and manage and slam into suits in order to use them. Warhammer 40k's Astartes have a whole backpack to power their suits, and it's honestly one of my favourite parts about their armor. The most basic version of power suit there is the exoskeleton, and for a little while there, a decade ago, they were very in vogue. And in some cases, these are also sort of like the chassis for power armor, the bit that does the heavy lifting and onto which armor plates are connected. But exoskeletons kinda have to be built in a weird, particular way that both enables the mechanical muscles to work with the human wearing them, while also being out of the way to allow for freedom of movement. It's a bit of a challenge that the exoskeletonless style of power armor doesn't have to contend with quite as much. That other style, something more of a power suit, blends the working parts with the armor parts, ending up with something a lot thinner since it distributes the mechanicals much more evenly over the body. Whether that's practical or even possible, well, I don't know. There's also the super high-tech style that something like Halo's Meow Meow suit does, with its polymerized lithium niobosine underlayer. This is essentially like a second set of liquid metal crystal muscles around the Spartan, and as such is very evenly distributed, making it look like there's nothing really there that provides power for the power armor. Something similar can kind of be said for the nanosuits from Crisis, but more about them later. Another really major design element is how the wearer gets in and out of a suit, and the early Iron Man movies really set the trend here. The very first movie popularized the complex machine suit-up thing that StarCraft actually showed off the previous year. This style really pushes the machinery style of things, showing that it's pieces of armor and mechanical bits put together around a person, as if they are just another component in it. Later MCU movies introduced more advanced suits that built themselves around the wearer, and later on the idea that they can just open up, either from the back or the front, letting a person simply step into or out of it at will. Much more suit-like and much more practical. And then Fallout 4 debuted its revamped power armor that used this entry method, and it's just fantastic. The suit itself is on the chunkier side, so it really hits the armor definition more than the suit. It's like wearing a personal tank. It's big and chunky, and there's the exoskeleton beneath with the mechanical parts that make it work. It makes perfect sense for the back of this thing to be the entrance, though I definitely would not want to need to make an emergency exit from it if it was damaged, which is a major issue that has to be considered with these suits. Bad things happen and you may need to escape, and quickly, or someone else might need to extract you from the suit. The chieftain has his "oh no, everything is on fire" test for evacuating tanks, and really the same thing applies here too. When normal egress is a massively involved process like the early Iron Man suits, it basically becomes impossible to imagine a quick way out, but perhaps there is one, but it's just destructive. But not every suit is built that way, so getting out if you're injured might not be possible, or even not preferable. It doesn't apply to every situation, but the suit might be what is keeping its wearer alive, be it through holding them together or providing life support. Hopefully that doesn't go too far though, like with the trauma harnesses from Old World Blues. Related to emergency escape is the size of the suit's occupant, which is pretty much never brought up. Anyone who needs to wear power armor is conveniently the right size for it. In Stark's case, well, that's because he made the suits for himself. What about Fallout though, where the suits are meant to be generic equipment for soldiers? We already saw what it's like for a particularly tall person to fit into a tank, so what about armor? Presumably there's just a maximum and minimum size, with some small elements that can be adjusted to fit. The thing is, the variance that allows isn't going to be that much, especially compared to the huge differences seen in the height of people. I don't know, it just seems like an issue that gets glossed over more often than not. The other major issue with the way power armor is depicted is the issue of impacts. All too often we see power armor completely absorbing blows that really should be transferred to the wearer, as if the armor just deletes impact entirely, which isn't the case. The kinetic energy from a hit on armor still gets transferred through, it just gets spread out either over time, area, or both. It's like treating the suit and its wearer as one and the same, rather than a squishy, gooey person that can flop about inside a hard shell. Think of what happens to a car when it hits something. They have crumple zones that help absorb the impact through breaking apart, protecting the occupants. An old or poorly designed car doesn't have those, and so the occupants take the force and end up injured or worse. At least the MCU finally got around to showing what happens from an impact when War Machine lost power, but that only seemed to happen for story reasons. The last thing to talk about is power armor that makes use of nanotechnology somewhere in its design, like Tony Stark's advanced armor from Infinity War, made from grey goo nano stuff rather than mechanical parts. It certainly makes the suit very adaptable, but it still has all the issues with impacts and damage and stuff, though at least here damage to one part of the suit can be repaired on the fly by just redistributing the suit's nano stuff. It's probably its best feature, and something that makes great use of what grey goo nano stuff can do. In contrast, we have the various nanosuits from the Crisis series. Rather than going full grey goo, these suits have some parts that are really tiny and can slightly reform themselves for different purposes. For example, the skin can transmit an image from behind it, making the suit effectively transparent, or it can harden to better absorb impacts from bullets or falls. But the Crisis nanosuits, particularly the 2.0 version, do something else as well. They actively meld with the wearer, becoming part of them. The ones that Prophet wore did this a lot because he was sent on special missions to interact with tech from the Ceph, the aliens in the franchise. And since the nanosuits are actually derived from Ceph tech, this interaction unlocked hidden potential in the suit. That meant it could work to create a cure for the Ceph's weird people-melting virus, among other things like completely overwriting the protagonist in the second game with Prophet's mind that was copied into the suit. And then, after the events of the third game, it even became Prophet. Pulling things back a bit, the Crisis suits sort of merging with their wearer is a decent enough explanation for how they are able to withstand the impact and hit that a regular power armor just handwaves away. There's no smushing around inside the suit because the wearer and the suit are one being. That concept really elevates the nanosuits to something a lot more interesting, especially since it's made using secret recovered alien tech, which tickles my brain just right. But that's not the vibe that every suit of power armor has, or should have. It's just a cool example of one of the many ways you can give flavour to the base concept or get around the flaws it has, or really flaws that spring up in certain depictions. But those depictions don't necessarily care about the realism. Iron Man getting taken out of the sky by an anti-air gun and just getting dinged up? Bit odd, but whatever, because it's followed up by one of the best examples of what makes power armor so alluring in the first place. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hojuana and today we return to the world of sci-fi firearms as we ponder just what features would make for a good fictional weapon. And we're going to start off with a big "it depends" because it really does. There's a ton of things that come from the setting, like the basic tech level and vibes. What's appropriate for the near future is very different to fantastical space opera stuff. Since the former is in vogue at the moment, let's talk a bit more about that. One important consideration is how much armor penetration do you want a weapon to have. Sure, going through body armor is helpful, but not all spacecraft in sci-fi are massive slabs of metal. Firing armor-piercing rounds in such places can easily have unforeseen consequences from missed shots that go right through whatever they hit. Damage can be done to all sorts of ship systems like ventilation, power, or even puncturing the exterior pressure hull. At least small rounds will make small holes, and there's not going to be explosive decompression without actual explosives, and if you're using those on a fragile spacecraft, then frankly, you deserve what you get. Back to firearms, and the other option is maybe you want so much penetration you can actively shoot straight through cover and armor. A common enough thing to see with electromagnetic weapons, mostly in games, but also now and then in other fiction. Or even better, making imaginative use of technology in the setting like the transporter rifle from DS9. You do need some sort of X-ray vision or something to make best use of these weapons. Also, having sights and weapons like this that render cover and concealment not really a thing would have some pronounced impacts on the rest of combat in the setting. As for ammo, there's all sorts of weird and horrible types of it you can be using. It's common to see flechettes in sci-fi because they're a real thing that sounds exotic and cool, but they aren't really that effective in actual use. There's other special things you can have ammo do too, like the radioactive ammo we talked about in a previous video. You can get similar effects from poisonous weapons and the like, which are an interesting solution to the problem of ensuring lethality from even a minor hit. We sort of skipped over the main consideration of ammo types though, which is what and where you're fighting. If you're not going up against enemies that use armor, you don't need armor piercing at all. And what if they have horrible melty blood or something? In that case, you'd want something that can avoid getting that everywhere, like energy weapons that can instantly cauterize a wound. As for the where, that primarily means the range you're fighting at. The velocity and shape and stability of the round matters there. Like if you have a slow bullet that tumbles after a second of flight, that doesn't matter so much for close quarters use. This stuff also applies to energy weapons too, since you can have lasers with optimal focus ranges that are pretty short, or using light frequencies that get scattered more over longer range. Something more hand-wavy like plasma can dissipate over a distance, but that doesn't stop it being good to use at short range. All of these things apply to the weapon itself too, through its size and accuracy from its build quality. Let's look at SG-1 for an example. They used P90s because they were smaller than a full-size rifle, but could still penetrate the armor that Jafar wore. The size and weight were important here because most SG teams were first and foremost there to explore, with specialized teams carrying proper rifles being deployed when combat was a known requirement of a mission. While we're talking about Stargate in the context of firearms, I can't not bring up that scene where they compare a P90 to a staff weapon, where O'Neill points out that one is for war and the other meant for fear, which is a valid point in the larger discussion because what role is a weapon meant to fulfill? The design requirements for any two given weapons can be entirely different, a disparity that gets much bigger when you throw alien cultures and ways of thinking into the mix. So while the staff weapon may be inferior to the P90 in many regards, that doesn't mean it's bad, it's just different. Going back to weapon size, and having a short weapon helps a ton in close quarters. Trying to walk or float around an interior with a big long gun sticking out in front of you is going to be extremely awkward, especially around doorways. This actually might be a good use case for energy weapons, since they don't need to rely on the linear acceleration of a projectile, so you can kinda make them in more varied shapes. But there is the matter of energy density and the power pack supplying the energy weapon, since that needs to beat how incredibly convenient chemical propellants are. But if they do, then hey, you might have infinite ammo. That means you might be saving weight that can be used on other equipment. So in some ways, that infinite ammo is a bit of a force multiplier. A squad that doesn't need to carry ammo can replace it with more anti-tank equipment or some other specialized gear. It also makes resupply much less necessary. No matter what design a theoretical infinite ammo weapon has, it still needs to be something easily held and pointed by a person, or an alien, and an alien weapon made for alien hands, or tentacles, or whatever, might be completely impossible for a human to actually hold and use, at least comfortably. Another ergonomic concern is that are weapons designed to work with spacesuits? Gloves on those in particular can be big and chunky, applying limitations on dexterity. A spacesuited finger might not fit in a trigger guard, for example, so remove the guard. Another issue with spacesuit bulk is that it may prevent its wearer from properly looking down the sights of a gun. This really depends on the suit's design though, especially the helmet. It is really common to see much more lightweight armor and spacesuits in fiction after all, but does every gun really need sights? We do see weapons without them for various reasons, which apply both in-universe and out. Hip firing used to be much more doctrinally prevalent in real life than it is now, and to be fair, it does mean you can react and put fire downrange much faster, either for suppression or just to aim using tracers, like a hose. But it turns out that actually aiming properly is superior. But there's not giant bugs trying to eat you in real life. That's why I love the dagger so much in Helldivers. You can just aim that super quick using the beam itself while you keep running away. And it's got functionally infinite ammo if you use it carefully, so you're much less likely to get stuck on a panicky reload while trying to dodge horribly toothy death. But if you do aim properly, what do future sights look like? Nowadays, it's very common to see red dot sights and similar things, and the natural sci-fi extension of that is holographic stuff that floats above the gun. There's an interesting world-building question to think about here. Would these be able to replace iron sights? Jonathan Ferguson thinks they probably should, and well, he is the expert. If you have something that convenient that doesn't get in the way, why would you bother using anything else? There is the potential of electronic warfare or EMPs disrupting equipment on a high-tech battlefield, but that's a pretty niche situation. I don't know, it just seems useful to me to have a physical backup like the telescopic sights and periscopes and stuff that modern armoured vehicles have. Something that's cheap to supply, easy to maintain, and always works. Whether or not you need longer-ranged magnified scopes depends on the purpose of the weapon, like all the previous range things we talked about earlier. Or hey, maybe there's integrated cameras and stuff used as sights right on the gun itself, but that seems pretty costly for mass production. As does the current emerging thing for firearms, having a full-blown fire control system, like the Vortex NGSW-FC. This thing is a scope with integrated rangefinder, atmospheric sensors, ballistic computer, and other stuff that lets it project the trajectory of your next shot right onto the sight itself. It's kinda nut, and we have that now. What sort of things will future guns have? Well, quite possibly some method of self-aiming. This can either be something that automatically points the entire gun where it needs to, or even better, ignores that entirely with guided rounds. We already have very basic versions of this now, but sci-fi can go even further with like miniature missiles and stuff that can make insane turns and do all the work for you. These do kind of have to be lower velocity in order to make those crazy turns, but I suppose they can carry a little payload to magnify their damage. Also, there's actually a good niche here for bulky spacesuit users, since a smart weapon renders the suit's awkwardness moot. One last and very important thing to remember is that just because there may be optimal choices to be made in weapons design, not every single weapon can or should make those choices. There's experiments, prototypes, variants, and crucially, lots of compromises made to those other factors. Cost and manufacturing methods, things like that. In a broader sense for who uses what, it's possible to see all sorts of things being used in suboptimal situations purely because that's what was available. Short-range weapons used at long range. Old weapons used when newer things are around. Eradicating these requirements just to have the firearm for every single situation makes the setting feel manufactured. The real world is messy and imperfect, and creations that aim to feel authentic should emulate that. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and space fighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.